including Mary Rodriguez, Imed Dami, Ajay Shah, Cathy Herms, and Ashish Manandhar to talk about the various aspects of mulching in vineyards. So a couple of things before we get started with the presentations. The first is that this webinar runs from 1:30 to 4:30. And each presentation runs in a half an hour increment. So if you have to leave early, please leave a comment in the box, and all comments will be answered at the end of the webinar period. So if you have to leave early, that's what this recording is for. You can just access the recording itself and then zip on through to hear your question answered. I would ask that all participants, because this is a meeting style webinar, to please keep your camera and microphone off during the presentations. And again, if you do have questions, please leave them in the chat, and all questions will be answered in a Q&A session at the end of all of the presenter sessions. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with Mary. Mary, if you'd like to share your screen.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to get this set up for us. All right. Maria, can you see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me the opportunity to present some research that we did as a group to better understand mulching as an alternative to soil hilling for winter protection. I will go ahead and tell you that I am a social scientist. I work in the Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Communication, Education, and Leadership, and my expertise is understanding farmer, and in this case, grower behaviors and adoption of technologies. So let me tell you a little bit about our survey. These results are based on a survey that was conducted in 2020 to understand growers' perceptions of mulching as an alternative for winterization, and it was conducted in various states, and I'll tell you about those respondents here in just a moment. The survey was sent online via Qualtrics, and so people had the opportunity to just fill it out online for us with both open-ended responses allowing for some explanation for the barriers as well to what they believed were barriers for mulching. So we will talk about both of those things, the adoption part and the perception of the innovation, and then the barriers. So let me go ahead and get started with who responded. So the survey respondents, there were 88 total responses, complete responses. They came from Canada, Connecticut, Michigan, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. And the majority came from Michigan and Ohio with 32 and 24 respondents respectively. The majority of respondents have been growing grapes commercially for 4 to 10 years, about 33.7%. However, there was a median of about 11 to 15 years. There were also respondents that had that selected that they have been growing grapes for over 20 years, and that was about 20 respondents in total. For the vineyard acreage, how much acreage were they growing? The majority of respondents stated that they are growing on greater than 15 acres. That's about 34% of the respondents, and a mean of 6 to 10 acres. The ones that responded that they had larger than 10 acres that they were cultivating at the moment, you can see here the number of responses here on the right-hand side. The majority here were 20 or six people responded that they had 20 acres, but then you can see as it goes over 50, the numbers definitely start to dwindle a bit. The largest grower responded that they were growing 250 acres. When asked about their current winter protection practices, this is where we start to understand a little bit more about what they're currently doing, and then we'll get into the perceptions of what they believe mulching is for. You can see here the responses were none, the wind machine, hilling up soil to protect graft unions, applying mulch to protect graft unions, relying on snow cover, burying canes, multiple trunks, or others, please specify. So 22% claim that they are using hill-up soil to protect graft unions, followed by no practices and other. And the other responses included hilling up young or first-year vines, wood chip mulching older vines as needed, multiple trucks and good site selection, relying on snow cover, vineyard snow plowing, laying down cane and covering with snow, or having multiple approaches. The average yearly crop vine economic loss from cold damage was estimated to be, the majority of folks estimated to losing less than $250 per acre from cold damage. The average loss was about $501 to $1,000 per acre amongst the respondents. When asked if they had heard about mulching, for example, using straw as an alternative method to soil hilling, 87% of respondents said that yes, they had heard of it. And the mulching material that they had heard of using was primarily wheat straw. So here's where we start to learn a little bit about the adoption of new technologies. Changing practices can be pretty complicated, especially when we're talking about agriculturalists. Growers have a lot of things that they're constantly trying to figure out in order to see what is going to be most beneficial for their practices and for their economic gains. The more a grower knows about a new practice or technology can really help in that decision making, but we need to understand what do they know and what do they perceive about a technology. So I use something called diffusion of innovations. It's a theory that helps us to explore grower perceptions, in particular looking at 5 different characteristics of a practice or an innovation, in this case, mulching. We also added affordability, since this was an important part of understanding whether growers would or would not potentially adopt this practice. All right, so we're going to go through the 5 different characteristics here. Let me just make sure I am on time. Sorry, just grabbing my phone here to keep me on track. All right. We're going to go through the 5 characteristics, and then we'll look at affordability, and we'll see what did the growers perceive when it came to these characteristics about mulching. So the first, grower perceptions. The first characteristic that we investigated is called relative advantage. The potential adopter, in this case the grower, needs to perceive that adopting the practice or the technology, here mulching for winterization, is more beneficial to them than what they are currently doing. The respondents had a neutral perception of this relative advantage. This means that when you are thinking about potentially changing, these growers did not see how it was more beneficial to them. They may need more information to see how, if they practice mulching for winterization, it's going to be better for them than not using it in order to influence their perceptions. So relative advantage, they had a neutral response. They didn't see it as more advantageous or not advantageous to actually use mulching. The next one is compatibility. Here we're looking at potential adopters, determining if this technology is compatible with their current practices. What are they currently doing? And is mulching going to just kind of be easy for them to get moving in their practices and their growing practices? In this case, respondents were also quite neutral in their perception of compatibility. They neither agreed nor disagreed that this practice aligns with their current, that the practice of mulching aligns currently with what they're doing. So practitioners may need to help growers see how mulching for winterization aligns well with their current growing practices. So when a farmer or a grower is asked about the compatibility of mulching for winterization, they're going to be thinking, does it fit in with what I'm already doing? Here they said that it neither does nor it doesn't. This is an important finding that we'll talk a little bit about later. Complexity is the next characteristic that we want to look into. Complexity is really important to consider how a potential adopter sees how difficult or how easy this new innovation is to practice, or this new practice, how mulching is going to be easy to do, in essence. Respondents mostly somewhat disagreed, though, with statements seeking to determine if mulching is difficult, meaning they didn't figure that it was that difficult. However, when they were asked if instructions were clear for using mulching for winter protection, and I am comfortable using mulching for winter protection, they were neutral. So here they say it's not difficult, but then when asked specific things about, well, can I actually do it? Am I comfortable and do I know how to do it? They said that they were neutral. This presents a finding to see that maybe they need more information on how to actually implement the mulching to potentially raise their comfort levels with this practice. If an adopter finds that a practice is more complex than they're willing to take on, they're likely not to adopt it. This next part is about observability, and observability is exactly what it sounds like. It is, can we see the results ourselves? So a potential adopter is more likely to implement the practice if they can see results. Ways to do this might be seeing a farmer next door doing mulching for winterization and seeing that they didn't lose as many as perhaps you did if you didn't do it. So when we asked respondents about how visible they see the results of mulching for winter protection, they neither agreed nor disagreed, meaning that perhaps they couldn't quite see what mulching did for protecting the vines during the winter. There is an opportunity here to showcase the effects of mulching for winter protection to potential adopters, making sure that they see this practice directly relates to this outcome. So that observability is really important. This fifth one is trialability. When we are trying to adopt a new practice or technology, potential adopters often would like to try it out with very little risk to them or their operations. This trial opportunity is key to influencing adoption. All of the other characteristics were really important, but this one actually comes down to the, will I actually use it if I can try it? So the data that we collected showed that respondents mostly neither agreed nor disagreed with the statements about trialability. Here again, this neutral stance demonstrates that they perceive that they can try it out, but they will likely need some sort of assistance. It's important to note that when we did ask them about an applicator for mulching for winter protection was available to adequately test or run various applications, they somewhat disagreed, meaning we might be willing to try it, but the applicator for mulching is not available for us to use. So again, what does this mean to us? Potential adopters of the technology should have the opportunity to try it without significant investment or little risk themselves. The best way to get somebody to adopt something is allowing them to try it and see for themselves those results that can come from it. Now, going back to observability, this also would help improving the visibility of the information on the practice, can help to see the results and the desire to try it out for themselves. So you start to see how all of these different characteristics come into play with one another. Relative advantage, I want to know if it's better than what I've been doing in the past. Is it difficult? The complexity, is it low? Is it easy for me to actually try? Can I see the results? Can I try it out? All of these pieces are really important to consider, and they all work together to see whether a potential adopter will take on a new practice. Now, this last part is affordability, and affordability really goes into the decision-making process of a grower to see, okay, so I've got these perceptions of this technology, of this practice, but can I actually put it into action? Can I actually afford it? And cost is one of the major barriers expressed later on that we'll talk about when it comes to using mulching for winterization. So we asked, how affordable do potential adopters believe this technology to be? They neither agreed nor disagreed on whether they believe that mulching is an affordable practice. They might not know how much it costs, or perhaps this also relates to their perception of the relative advantage of this practice. Again, meaning when it comes to factoring in cost when deciding to use mulching, respondents somewhat agreed. So the cost really plays into whether or not I believe that it's worth me trying and it's actually better than what I've been doing all along. If you don't see a practice as either affordable or unaffordable, again, this neutral stance, they might not see how it's more beneficial, and they're unlikely to adopt it and change their current practices. All right, so those were the 5 characteristics and affordability and the way that growers perceived this to occur, or perceived mulching for winterization. All right, so the overall perceptions of that is that respondents were very middle of the road when it came to their perceptions of mulching for winter protection. They had heard of mulching as a practice, and many had done it themselves, but they are neither in support or against it for winter protection. This provides us with the opportunity to showcase the benefits of this practice and target changing potential adopter perceptions of it. So understanding these perceptions that they hold, we can start to see how can we change them for potential adoption. All right. So this next part is all about barriers to adoption of mulching as a practice. We asked them, what are the barriers that you perceive to actually mulching for winterization? And the key themes that came up from the responses, from the free responses, meaning open-ended, were time, cost, availability of material, cost versus benefit, and labor and energy. So when looking at time, all these are quotes directly from the data. So time, usually this would be done post-harvest and the window of opportunity is quite limited to get it done in a timely manner. This is just an example of how time was a barrier. Costs both in materials and labor, keeping vineyard management costs down to maximizing profitability is a major factor influencing our management practices. So they believed here that that mulching was cost prohibitive according to their management practices. And again, the availability of material was stated as a barrier, availability of affordable and weed-free mulching material, and another quote, price and availability of straw for mulching. The other two were cost benefit and labor and energy. Here's a quote from a grower stating, willing to learn about it, but it's often that we see research papers that sound good in practice yet don't fully account for this cost benefit value. Also, equipment is expensive and smaller operators may not be able to afford equipment that would make the practice affordable, doable from a labor standpoint. Having a consortium of wineries that can share equipment or the availability of rental equipment could change acceptance if the economics work. So here, this grower is definitely trying to see, how can I actually do this, cost versus benefit? And the last one was labor and energy. One of the growers stated that we use straw to cover up just 6 of our rows after planting slow-growing grass as a cover crop. Spreading several blades of hay took much longer than we anticipated. The physical energy required by 2 people in their 60s was exhausting. I wouldn't do all acreage. So they find that, and this is just one example, but several examples stated how labor and energy were certainly prohibiting or barriers to using mulching. Excuse me. They believe that the practice to be costly, time and labor intensive, and it doesn't present a sufficient advantage over other practices or no practices for winter protection. The barriers may be attributed to a lack of proper information on costs and labor, etc. Remember, we talked about those perceptions earlier. Well, you can start to see in the barriers that if we have data to show that these barriers actually aren't barriers, it's really attributing to a lack of information. They have formed a slightly negative perception of using mulching as a practice for winter protection according to the open-ended results that we found. And they definitely don't see this relative advantage over what they're currently doing. All right. Ooh, I flew through that. Some final takeaways. It's very hard to change someone's opinion when they can't see the benefits for themselves. To increase adoption of this practice, growers must have more information about the practice, clear demonstration of results and advantages, and if possible, the ability to try it out for themselves. And when it comes to the possibility of machinery for this particular practice, one must address the concerns for affordability, reduction in labor, and the likelihood of a return on investment. So those are just some things that we kind of put together to better understand what did this survey tell us. So sorry I flew through that so quickly, but thank you so much for your attention, and I know that Q&A will be held today at the end of today's session.
Thank you so much, Mary. We're going to move on to our next presenter, Imed Dami, who's going to be talking about the impacts of mulching on viticultural parameters. So, Imed, if you'd like to get your video screen shared, we can get your presentation going.
Can you hear me okay, Maria?
Yeah, through our audio, it sounds a little muffled. Can you pull your mic a little bit closer?
How about now?
That's a little bit better. It's still kind of muffled though.
I try to get it as close here as possible.
Okay, yep, I can see your slides. Can you roll through them?
I'm about to find out.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Thank you, Maria. Good afternoon, everybody. And again, thank you for joining us today for this 3-hour webinar. We hope you find it useful to your operations and informative. So the theme of the webinar today is on vineyard mulching, as Maria indicated. And my colleagues and I will be presenting hopefully some of the benefits of mulching beyond winter protection that may, change the minds of growers. That is one of the things, as Mary indicated, is the lack of information to decide whether to do it or not. So hopefully, by the end of this webinar, you have a better idea about whether mulching is something to consider in your vineyard operation. So my presentation today will be on studying the impact of mulching on vine growth, yield, and fruit quality. And my colleagues today will be presenting other aspects of the impact of mulch on other aspects related to the vine or to the soil. The outline of my presentation, I will give a brief overview of mulching and then this project specifically, and then list our objectives and the questions that we address, and then finally share with you our research findings and conclusions. So the first thing that we have addressed with this is that what is the problem? As Mary indicated earlier, we are dealing here with cold damage, which is the most limiting factor for grape growing in the Midwest and in the East. And basically, cold damage not only results in crop loss, but also sometimes it even kills the vine. These are some of the survey. Actually, I'm sharing similar information from Mary, and was surprised, to see that 3 out of 4 growers said that they lose on a yearly basis between less than $250 to $1,000 per acre, which is very significant. So it shows you how economically devastating cold damage could be. And for us here in Ohio, one of the worst cold damage that we experienced was back in 2015, following the polar vortex, where we estimated crop loss to $12 million. And this shows you kind of some of the losses, not only on crops, but also it could also kill the vine to the ground or even kill the whole vine overnight. Again, from the same survey, looking at what are the methods of protection that grower use, and actually number one, based on the most percentage of growers reported that they use soil healing. So that kind of shows you that is a very common practice and like an industry standard. The other thing, also in more northern states, like in Michigan, 13% actually they rely on snow, and many of them actually commented that even though this has been a very reliable way of protecting, the vines or the graft union, they have seen less and less snow in recent years because of this warming climate, and they are worried, that they cannot rely on snow anymore, and this probably kind of give a window to mulching as an alternative. From the same survey, also some growers reported that they use mulching, about 10%, but again, as you can see, it's a very limited portion, and I will discuss later the reason. So, as I indicated, soil healing is basically the standard practice for winter protection. In case you're not familiar with it, basically the grower every year, they heal up the base of the vine, as shown in this picture here. And then the following spring, they heal the vines again, and they repeat this every year. And this is typically done with sensitive varieties of species that the And the idea here, by mounding the soil at the base, it will protect not only the graft union, but also the base of the soil. And when it gets cold, the soil actually mound acts as an insulator, and typically it stays warmer than the air temperature. And that's why, by staying warmer, it protects, the graft union and the base of the soil. However, at times when it gets extremely cold, like it happened back in 2016, all the parts of the vine exposed to air may die, like it's shown here in this commercial vineyard. However, anything underneath this soil mound will survive. So the idea when you use the healing, the vine doesn't necessarily die, but it leaves some parts, and then these vines could be retained the same year and resume production basically the following year, as compared to completely losing the vine. So it's been around for a long time, and it has worked very, very well, every year. However, I was surprised, 100% of the respondents to the survey indicated that they have problems with soil healing. So they use it because that's the only thing available, but at the same time, they wish that there is something else that is less harmful. And the main problem that they listed includes soil erosion, trunk damage. This is from using these implements like the plow, the disc, or this grape hoe. And then sometimes this mechanical damage may lead to diseases like crown gall. And then, of course, having the heavy traffic on the vineyard over the years, causes soil compaction to develop. So the alternative, as I mentioned earlier, is the use of mulching. Again, this is not something new. It's been around for a long time. However, as I mentioned earlier, from that survey that was conducted, only 10% of the growers use it. And these are, as Mary mentioned earlier, the main reasons why they don't use it is the extent of the mulch. And then the other thing is there is no like a specific or specialized equipment to apply mulch in the vineyard. Actually, at the time when we looked around, for the equipment in the market, we couldn't find any. The only one available actually was from Australia, as shown in this picture, how it applies soil mulch, and there is none here in the US. So, and at the same time, and from the same survey, many indicated they would use mulching if it is cost effective and if the equipment is available. So, based on those, we developed our objective to test a few mulches and then evaluate their impact on both the design and program. And from this project, actually, we tried to answer all these 12 questions. My colleagues as well will be answering some of these questions this afternoon. And in my presentation, I will address this one here highlighted in green. Basically, whether mulching has any impact on vine nutrients and yield to quality. Another concern is the scion rooting. And then finally, whether mulch could be used more than once a year. So we established this project back in 2019, and we used both research and commercial vineyards in Northeast Ohio. The variety that we tested include both the vinifera, Cabernet Franc, and the hybrid region. The mulch side, basically, we try to use, because I know this was indicated in the survey, that the availability of the mulch really sometimes can be a problem. So we try to use something that is readily available in our region, including the corn, stover, and wheat straw. And then we also added miscanthus. I will talk a little bit more later on why. And then we use the soil here as our input. So basically, we have 4 treatments in this video. So miscanthus, in case you're not familiar with it, this is a perennial grass. It is actually native to Asia, and then it was imported here to the US. And in early years, one of the reasons why it was kind of investigated is for its use as a biofuel at the time, you know, when gas was expensive. But then the price of gas went down, and then there was less and less interest on its use as a biofuel. Of course, that's not the case nowadays with the price of gas, but other uses of miscanthus were explored, including use for ventilation. Recently, the company actually, Alapera, that provided us with miscanthus, they manufacture what we call molded products that are disposable plates. So these are recyclable or compostable. And another use that we try to investigate in this project is to use miscanthus as a mold. And one of the reasons why we selected this grass is in Northeast Ohio, there are over 4,000 acres planted with miscanthus, and actually in western Pennsylvania as well, from these companies. And in Northeast Ohio, actually, the majority of great acres is located there. So the idea was that maybe when you have miscanthus in proximity to the vineyard, it will reduce its cost and it will minimize the problem with availability. And as you can see in this picture, definitely the very large plants that can grow up to 13 feet in height. And in terms of biomass production, actually, they have doubled the amount of biomass as compared to corn or wheat crop. These are a close-up of the mulches that we use. Again, soil is our control. And then we use, you know, the corn stover, the wheat straw, and 2 types of miscanthus. What you see here is the size. You can see the size is not uniform. Basically, that's what we have available. And then in terms of miscanthus, we have 2 sizes. This one here, about 1 inch particle size, and this one here is much more final, less than 1/4 inch. almost looks like a sawdust. And then I will explain later on how this actually could be a factor in terms of the size of the mold. So back in 2019, in the fall, just like the time of healing up the vineyard with soil, we at the same time applied these mulches, as you see here in this picture. And I was always asked, how we applied it, and it's basically applied by hand. Okay, so we didn't use an equipment for this, and we applied the mulch between two channels. Within a channel between the two posts, we have different treatments, including all these 4 treatments. In this drawing here that you see below, what I'm trying to show you is when we apply it by hand, actually we didn't apply like a uniform height throughout the channel, but we made what we call this mound around each vine, about 8 inches high. And the main reason for the height here is we want to make sure that we cover the grass unit and more. Okay, just to be safe. And then between the vines, we only applied 3 inches high of the mound. And one of the reasons why we did this is to basically limit the amount of mulch applied and then the extent. So in this table here, it shows you how much you applied per channel for each mulch. And then when you compute this per acre, it corresponds to 4 tons per acre for corn, 5 tons per acre for wheat, and 8 tons per acre for cotton. So one of our earlier questions is to answer whether when you apply mulch, it will have an impact in the grapevine nutrient status. And one of the concerns, actually a couple of them, as you know, when you apply a mulch, you are basically adding the organic matter to the vineyard. And sometimes when you add more organic matter to the vineyard, you may induce more vigor of the vines, and that is not desirable, especially for wine grapes. So in one hand, you may benefit from the mulch, but then you don't want to create another problem. That's the first concern. And then the second one has to do with the nitrogen availability. So with the mulches, typically they are characterized with what we call the carbon to nitrogen ratio, shown here in this column. And basically that ratio simply put will give you an idea whether there is a lot of nitrogen available or not. So actually the higher this ratio is, the less nitrogen available. So as you can see, with corn we have the least, the lowest ratio is Wisconsin, we have the highest ratio. So what that means is you have less nitrogen available with a higher ratio. And that is a concern because you may create a situation of nitrogen deficiency. So these are the two concerns that needs to be addressed. And as you can see here, as a rule of thumb, when this ratio is below 20, then nitrogen will be readily available. But when it is above 20, which is the case for all the mulches that we use, then nitrogen is not available, and that could be an issue, and we may create some deficiencies in the vine. So to answer the question, we collected schedules and we analyzed them for nutrient status as shown here. This is from last year. We did both actually during June and the raging. And as I mentioned, the nitrogen status was very important. These graphs are just explained here in this slide, but they will be the same in the rest of the slides. The brown color here indicates the soil here. The green is miscanthus, yellow is wheat straw, and then orange is corn stalk. So as you can see here, during bloom, we didn't see any differences in terms of nitrogen content in the cellules when they are collected during bloom. And then actually when they were collected during veraison, same observations, we didn't see any differences. So which is good. So that means we're not causing any increase or any decrease of nitrogen. We didn't look at only nitrogen, we also looked at other macronutrients. In general, without going through details here, we didn't really see any consistent trend, overall. However, the other thing that we observed in this nutrient analysis is all these nutrients were available at the desirable range. So we didn't have any deficiency or excess during this trial. Same thing with the micronutrients. We looked at these during bloom and veraison. And as you can see in all these graphs, when you don't see any lettering, that means there are no significant differences among the most species in comparison to the soil. To confirm further our observations in terms of nitrogen status, we also, one of the ways we monitor vine vigor is through what we call vine size by grain pruning. And here it's showing the regions in 2 seasons. And again, you see all the treatments in 2020, no differences among the treatments in both years. So what that means is we are not affecting negatively the vine size when we use these different mulches and compare them to the soil here. So that's also, again, it's a good thing. Then later, at the end of the season, during harvest, we also collected harvest or yield data. Again, showing the regions here, both in 2020 and 2021. We didn't see any differences, again, from using different mulches in both years. I'm sharing with you regions, but we saw the same thing with Cabernet Franc. No negative impact on yield from the different mulches that we use. In terms of fruit quality, we use the main or standard descriptors, including the sugars, pH, and the acidity of the juice. And again, from both 2020 and 2021, we didn't see any differences in any of these parameters among all the mulches when compared to the soil. Same thing with 2021 Europe. So what that means is we didn't have any negative impact when we use this type of mulches. The other question that we addressed, and again, this was a concern by growers, is the fine rooting. Of course, when you do the mounding, like using the soil, the main reason why you do the beginning during the spring is you want to avoid the fine rooting because that could create problems because of the phylloxera in the soil. So when we did the mulches, we also looked at that, and then the simple answer to whether it causes the fine rooting is yes. And you cannot see it very well in these pictures, but we saw roots in all the treatments. However, mainly the treatments with miscanthus and mulch as shown here in both years, we saw a significant amount of roots on those vines as compared to the soil and the rest of the mulches. So this is really not desirable thing to see. However, I'm sharing with you regions. However, when we look at Cabernet Franc, and as you can see here, it says fine miscanthus. With Cabernet Franc, we use the larger miscanthus, 1 inch long miscanthus. We didn't see any differences between the treatments. So as you can see, the size actually affects whether we have significant rooting or not. The other thing too is these roots were small, and at the end of the season they all die out. So this really was not an issue even when we did this a couple of years in a row. The last thing that we investigated is whether we could use the mulch for more than 1 year. As I mentioned earlier, when we do soil healing, we have to do the practice of cumulative effect to be done every year. So when we apply the mulch, and as mentioned earlier, one of the concern is expense, is whether we could use it for more than 1 year. So we looked at one of the ways we measured these is we measured the height of the mound around each vine. As I mentioned earlier, we try to make this mound about 8 inches high. So what we found in year one, well, basically this is the year when we applied it the first time, they are all at 8 inches, so that's when we applied it. In year two, we saw a small reduction in terms of the height, and among all the treatments, actually more severe is soil, almost a third of the height of the original height. Again, indicating one of the problems with soil is we see this erosion. But also we saw some reduction among the mulches, but was not very high, really. Was between a 3 and little over 10% reduction. So most likely, the mulch over a year it will settle. But what is important is the height still stays above this line here, which is 4 inches, which we use as our threshold, basically the top of the graft union, because we don't want the mulch to go below the graft union. Then it doesn't serve the purpose of winter protection anymore. So as you can see in year two, we still have enough mulch around the vines, and we end up not applying it again in this year. However, in year three, again, we didn't apply it. You could see the reduction was much more significant. And at this time, for all the 3 mulches that we used, the height fell below the 4 inches threshold. So that means the graft union is exposed, and that's not good. So basically, in year three, we had to replenish the mulch. So even though we did that, actually, it's not bad because you could apply it, not every year, but every other year, which helps in terms of spreading the cost over 2 years. I believe that's my last slide. So in summary, what I call the desirable responses, we didn't see the mulch to be causing any negative impact on the growth, yield, or food quality, which is good. In terms of the mulch amount, whether we apply it every year, it's not needed. Actually, you could apply it every other year. So that means there is a cost cut when you do this practice. Undesirable response, this has to do with the sign routing, with using mulch. But as I indicated, when you use the larger size mulch, this is not an issue, and the roots are not viable anyway. One of the things that I would believe that we need to do further investigation, and this is something probably would be better understood in terms of the longer term studies, is whether the mulch has any impact on the grapevine mission status in the long time period of time. I would like to conclude by thanking all the collaborators in this project, and also thanking my great team, as well as thank you for the sponsors, mainly the USDA program, and the special thanks goes to all of our collaborating roles, including Debonair Vineyard, South River Vineyard, and Toronto Vineyard. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Imed. We'll be moving on to our next presenter, who is Ajay Shah, and he'll be speaking on mulcher equipment. So Ajay, you should have co-hosting abilities and be able to share your screen.
Yes, sounds pretty good. So yeah, it seems like it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So can you please?
Yes, let me find where you're at.
Yes,
Okay.
I can share it now.
Okay, awesome. It makes me wonder who the random person was that got co-hosting.
Yeah.
Whoever that is, please feel free to present. So can you see my slide?
Yes, I can see them.
Sounds pretty good. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ajay Shah. I'm professor in the Department of Food, Agricultural and Biological Engineering at Ohio State University. So basically, I do not come from the grape background, but I do have like lots of experience with different kinds of biomass, agricultural resources. That is where we came together as a team and tried to complement each other's expertise, and then tried to see whether mulching, different kind of ag residue-based mulching would be a viable winter protection solution for vineyards. So can you all hear me well?
Yes, yeah, we can
Okay,
hear you really well.
great. Yeah, so that is where most of my presentation will build on what Dr. Dami already presented, kind of like more of he presented on the different types of mulches and its impact on the physiology of the grape and other properties, but I'll focus mainly on more of the mechanistic properties, kind of like whether it was able to maintain the temperature in comparison to soil healing or not. And then building on like what Dr. Rodriguez presented earlier, like one of the key challenge to adoption is equipment, right? The fear of the producer that whether or not we have mechanical way to apply the mulches. So we have explored like few of the equipments and all, so we'll briefly talk about it. And then before I get in to my presentation, I would like to acknowledge Dr. Anirudh Akula, who was a postdoc working with us, basically who did most of this work, but unfortunately due to his personal situation, he had to depart. So I'd like to acknowledge him and then say that whatever I'm presenting is building on his work. So yeah, I'll try my best. So yeah, so getting back to my slides, so it's kind of like same slides or similar kind of introduction that Imed already presented. So basically what we did was at different test research location in OARDC, we established some controlled trials where we evaluated 3 different kinds of malts: wheat straw, corn stover, and miscanthus, and we compared with soil healing as the control. So I won't go in detail of these because Dr. Dami has already covered these. So basically these are again, like it's the same figure that Dr. Dami showed. So but just wanted to connect to this figure. And then what we did was at different heights, we installed the temperature sensors at the ground level, and 4 inches from the ground level we established the temperature sensor. If you see here, it's kind of like I button, so we can just mount it or body it in the field, and then it gives us the temperature. So this is just an example of one of the wheat straw panel. And then we also install the sensor for soil healing to measure the temperature. And then in addition to that, we also wanted to get the ambient temperature at the vineyard. So what we did was we installed the temperature sensor at 5 feet from the ground level. And then we also use the solar radiation cap to minimize any influence of the direct solar radiation that impacts the temperature and all. So this is an example of like fine grounded miscanthus panel that Dr. Dami earlier talked about. Just an example, but we did it for all different mulches that we had. And so now I'll briefly talk about some of the temperature profiles that we had. So the figure on the left, it shows for the soil healing. So, so the one that with lots of noise, the brown or the black lines, those are the air temperature or the ambient temperature. So if you see here, the temperature fluctuated quite a bit from 10 degree Fahrenheit to as high as 70 degree Fahrenheit within like within the winter months. And then once the temperature started to increase, getting into more of like summer, that is where the temperature was like pretty high. So, but the temperature that we measured for the soil healing are shown in brown, the dotted lines, and these are like at different locations. So, so basically, the key takeaway from this is just to further elaborate or clarify this this figure. We just took a section from February 13 to March 2nd, and then we just blew up the figure just to provide it like better. If you see, the ambient temperature was anywhere from below 10 degree Fahrenheit to as high as 50 within pretty short span of a week. But if we see the temperature was held pretty well. Good thing is that when the temperature was high, it would go slightly follow the height, but when it was going deep, like soil, it had like enough, it maintained the temperature pretty well. So this is for the soil healing, which is control, and that is what is the business as usual practice that is being used right now. So now this is now I'll show like some slides on the temperature profile or the winter protection that that different mulches provided. So this is for corn stover. Again, like ambient temperature is the same. It's the same research site that we had. So again, like if we see here, it's pretty busy slide. So, but if you can just from this and these are like different plots at like 30 minutes time interval, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. So we collected a whole bunch of data, and at like at the ground level and at the 4 inch from the ground. But just to further clarify or to further like show it, we just took the same section of between February 13 to March 2nd, and then we blew up the figure and then tried to show this. So ambient temperature, again, like as we already saw, it's pretty fluctuated. It has pretty wide range of fluctuation. And then, but if you see the protection that the corn stover provided was it held the temperature pretty consistent, regardless of all this swing in temperature that it had. So just going back to the previous slide, if you see, it's just little over 30 for soil healing, but I think it seems like slightly it provided even like it maintained the healthy temperature even to slightly higher higher temperature. It seems like around 35. So it provided pretty good protection in terms of like maintaining the holding the temperature and providing the winter protection. And then this is the again like same diagram, but for the panels with wheat straw mulch. Again, like I mean, if we see here, mostly it followed, but like there were some instances, especially at the height, it kind of like followed more of the ambient temperature. And one of the reason was, I think the mulch or the quantity that was used was a little bit low. So there is kind of like trade-off between what is the packing density of the mulch, what are the sizes, what are the height. So all those are the optimization parameters that we have to explore more and more to provide like more better effectiveness of it. So again, like if we see the same section of temperature, it still at the ground level, it held pretty well. It maintained pretty well. And as I said, like the quantity of malts that were used was slightly lower for wheat straw. So it kind of like slightly followed the ambient temperature, but still it performed pretty well. So, and then this is for the miscanthus, and like same section. And then if we look at this figure, it provides pretty good protection against winter protection for the vines. So and then we just put all the different temperatures on the same panel with at different height from the ground, at the ground level or at 4 inches, and compared with the soil and compared with the ambient temperature. And then the result shows that it provided pretty good protection against the winter protection for the grapevines. So, and then we also took thermal imaging for different mulching or different mulching sites that we had, and then the results that we have here. And then this is just the temperature gradient if you look through it, and these are like on different sections, so I won't go in details of it. Just the point that I'm trying to make here is, so with thermal imaging it was able to replicate it gives us the same result that we got from our sensor. It's kind of like our way of validating two different kinds of equipment instruments that we used. So now, before I go into the mulching, so some of the things that we learned from the winter protection study in terms of like temperature was, I mean, some of the factors that matters a lot would be particle size, the height, the length, and we do have like 2 or 3 years of worth of data right now, as Imed already previously presented, but we need to see for maybe a few more years to get like more robust data around it. But so far we are pretty enthusiastic with it, and then all the results that we saw were very encouraging, and it seems like it provides winter protection for it. So, but as I said, like when it would be a function of like lots of other parameters which will have to for example, quantity that we use, the packing density, the particle size, how high we apply it. So those will be like lots of different things that we need to optimize. And then some of those and how does that impact the cost will be presented later on this session on one of our presentations. So now getting to the next question that Mary showed earlier regarding like whether there is a mechanization possibility of mechanizing the system or not. So we did the market research on different kind of equipments which could which could be the potential source for that we could adopt for this technology or for mulching for vineyards. And then we came across like lots of different kind of equipments. So Anirudh basically studied all of these different equipments in quite a bit of detail, and then came up with the kind of summary. But I would just like to summarize like key takeaway from it. So basically, we found that there are existing equipments which ranges in size pretty small, which could be suitable. And then from the first presentation that we saw, that the ranges of farmers using or the grape farmers ranges from like anywhere from like 1 acre to 50 acres, right? So, or even more. So depending on the size, there are already options which can be adopted with maybe a little bit of modification, which could be used for mulching practices. And like that probably would address some of the concerns that was pointed out, or that was that we saw from the survey results. So lots of these equipments differ in size, capacities, but this could be suitable for each of those has like unique capabilities and could be suitable to different sizes and applications. But in general, the principle is pretty simple. So they chop the bales or biomass and spread it, and then there are ways to modify the equipment so that we could control the particle size, we could control the discharge area size. So and then so after we did all these market evaluation of or looking into different brands and varieties of equipments that are available, which could potentially be adapted for mulching for the grape vineyards, we let me share my sound as well. Yeah, so we first thing that we tested was the pads chopper. So it's basically the small unit, and then what it does is and it's relatively cheaper piece of equipment, and we are doing like further doing the cost benefit analysis on it, and then it should pay back for its investment in relatively short time period. So basically what it does is it has the capability just to handle the small bales, but for the small farmers it could be pretty ideal solution. And then I'll just play this video pretty quick just to give you the demonstration. Yeah, so just to give some idea, and Mike Klingman is pulling it. It's so basically just to give you the idea on like when that may be less exhaustive for some of the farmers that we saw earlier from our survey results, if we have like any sorts of mechanized equipments. So just to show like on how uniform and well mound and then like discharge it can form, and it basically it just works on the small bales. Then we went further and then started thinking of what if there are like larger farmers with like large number of acreages, are there equipment or the options? So we went ahead and we bought Cavern Land Taruk 856 mulcher. So basically what it does, that it has the capacity to fit the round bale up to 4.5 feet diameter, and then the rectangular bale of 4x4 cross section and up to 8.5 feet length. And then it has the capability that it would chop and discharge, and there are ways. So we are further we did a little bit of modification and kind of like tailoring its discharge and others, and there are like other modifications that could be done. But the key takeaway is there are equipments which can be adapted and be utilized for grapevine mulching. So again, like when we do have a short video on its operation. So these are all, we tested these in our research unit at Worcester. And then we can change the discharge size and all. These were just the some of the tests that we are trying to do. And then we could also do some modifications with the blades and all to change the particle sizes. And then and this is PTO driven, so you can just pull it with the tractor if you have like larger acreages. So the key takeaway is there are already existing equipments which could be adapted for grape vineyard mulching. So with this, I would like to conclude my talk with by summarizing few take home messages. So basically, what we saw was in terms of winter protection, biomass mulches can provide effective winter protection to grapevines. And then from Imed's presentation, we saw that it has like it's very comparable with soil healing. And then it's very comparable with soil healing, and in some cases there may be long-term impact. For example, if the mulch is there, it has the nutrients and all, so it could dissolute, and then it could be a source of nutrients as well. And then like there are other interesting talks coming on, so we'll see some of those impacts. And then definitely the performances of mulching can be further optimized and improved by more testing of different kind of mulches, particle size. So it will be all the different kind of optimization that we need to do for it. And then as we just saw, that the existing equipment can be adapted for vineyard biomass mulching. With definitely there could be a little bit of motivation that we need to do, but based on my experience, I think if we adopt these technologies, it may pay back for its investment in pretty short duration. So with this, I would like to conclude my presentation, and we'll be happy to answer your questions at the end in the question and answer session. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Ajay. So Cathy Herms is sitting here in our group conference room, and she'll be presenting from here. So let me get her presentation up. I'm going to keep the camera off for her presentation, in part because there are 5 of us, and it'll help the focus stay on Cathy. Okay. Yes. Is that you might be able to use the
Okay, thank you, Maria. Yeah, so my name is Cathy Herms. I am a weed scientist here at Ohio State University, and I do research on weeds and soils. And I am working with Dr. Dami and Doug Dewan, who's another weed scientist here, and some others on looking at the benefits of mulching for weed control and soil health in vineyards. And so as we've heard other presenters talking about soil hilling as the standard practice for preventing winter injury to vines and the graft union area of vines, but soil hilling does require resources, fuel, labor, and specialized equipment to do the annual hilling and de-hilling. And then when you're doing that soil disturbance, you're actually creating bare soil, and that environment is perfect for weed germination, which then necessitates the need to do weed control throughout the season, which could be mechanical or chemical control. And then that bare soil can increase water loss from under the vines. And then the repeated soil disturbance can also have negative impacts on soil health. It can reduce soil organic matter and reduce the microbial populations in the soil. Soil disturbance can increase soil compaction, and this can lead to water ponding and water runoff. And then when you have increased runoff, you can actually have increased offsite movement of pesticides. And then the frequent soil disturbance can actually exacerbate soil erosion on hilly sites. So we were interested in looking at an alternative, more sustainable alternative to soil hilling, and looking at mulching as that practice. And so what I looked at, and specifically, is I looked at if mulching can control weeds, help to conserve water, help to improve soil physical properties, and improve soil biology when compared to the standard practice of soil hilling. And Dr. Dami had already gone over the setup for the study, but just as a quick review, I collected data at 2 sites, 2 of the 3 sites that we have established for this study. And so essentially we had the treatment of the standard soil hilling compared with 2 or 3 different mulching treatments. And those mulch treatments were miscanthus, wheat straw, and corn stover. And for the soil hilling, the standard practice was that at the beginning of the growing season, we apply a post-emergence herbicide, then de-hill, and apply a pre-emergence herbicide. And then later in the summer, after that pre-emergence herbicide wore off, the effectiveness wore off, then it would require a summer burn down herbicide, and then a pre-winter hilling. So those were the steps and kind of the management required for the soil hill treatment. Comparatively, when we're looking at the mulch treatments, the mulching treatments were applied in November of 2019, and then they were not reapplied again until December of 2021, which was last December. And there was no use of herbicides and no soil disturbance. So the first question, does mulching control weeds in comparison to soil hilling? And so we evaluated that by looking at 3 different variables: weed cover, weed biomass, and weed diversity. And we determined by looking at the entire plot, which is the row under the vines, and we did an estimate of the % weed cover in that plot. For biomass, we used a small 1/4 meter square quadrant. We put that into the vines, removed any of the weed biomass.
If your mic is on, would you please turn it off? Because we're getting additional sounds coming through. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then for the weed biomass, we put a quadrant down. We removed all the weed biomass above the soil surface and got a dry weight and compared those for the treatments. And then while we were doing the weed biomass, we were able to also record the different species of weeds that were growing in the areas under the vines. Okay, and so then what did we find? We found that mulching in both 2020 and 2021 reduced the % cover of weeds compared with soil hilling. So as other speakers have shown, there are the different treatments in the different colors. The soil hilling is brown, miscanthus is green, wheat straw is yellow, and corn stover is orange. And so you can see that for both 2020 and 2021, we're getting very good performance, especially for the wheat straw and the miscanthus at reducing the growth of weeds under the vines. When we look at weed biomass, we see a similar pattern. And we are especially seeing the differences in the second year in 2021, in summer of 2021. And where wheat straw and miscanthus again had the lowest weed biomass, and all of the mulches had less weeds in 2021 compared to the soil hilling. And then we look at weed diversity. So we looked at weed diversity in 2021 in the second year. So even 2 years after putting the mulches down, we're seeing significantly fewer numbers of weeds in the wheat straw and miscanthus treatments. So just pictures say 1,000 words. 2 years after mulch application, mulching is still helping to control weeds. So you can see the soil hill plot, so soil hill plot at the top, then wheat straw, miscanthus, and corn stover. And corn stover gave the least amount of protection after 2 years. Some of the dominant weed species in Worcester in year 2 included common purslane, white clover, and dandelion for the broadleaves. And then for grasses, we had yellow foxtail, barnyard grass, and bluegrass. These are common weed species in the Worcester area. And even though we saw good control of weeds with the mulches, after 2 years, we did see more perennial weeds coming into the mulching treatments than the soil hill, which would make sense. So perennial weed species are disfavored by frequent soil disturbance. And so the soil hilling, pretty much that's pretty much selected for annual weeds. Whereas with miscanthus, corn straw, the wheat straw and the corn, we were getting some perennials moving in, especially perennials that were growing in the grass surrounding the vineyards, such as white clover, dandelion, and the annual bluegrass. Okay, so our next question, does mulching conserve water? And so we did this by looking at soil moisture using a soil moisture meter. We were able to estimate the volumetric water content of the soil, and we looked at 4 depths from 1.5 inches to 8 inches. We took the measurements 6 inches from the graft union, and we waited for a dry spell, at least a week without rain, so that to help to see contrasts among the treatments. And we found that mulching increased soil water content, especially in both years. So this is for Ferrante. Some of the other data I've been showing is for the Worcester plots. This is for the Ferrante plots in Geneva. And you can see that as we go deeper with the soil moisture measurements, that soil moisture increases with depth, which makes sense. Then you can also see that at each depth, we had more soil moisture under the mulching treatments than the soil hill. So then another question, does mulching improve soil physical properties? And we did this by evaluating water infiltration and soil compaction. To do the water infiltration, we used a mini disc infiltrometer. And what that does is estimate the hydraulic conductivity, or essentially the rate at which water infiltrates or flows into the soil. And then to measure compaction, we used a field penetrometer. And what that does is record the pounds per square inch force required to push the field penetrometer in the soil every 2 inches. And both of these measurements, we did 6 inches from the vine. And we did those in comparison with or in contrast with the soil moisture. We did these measurements within 48 hours of a soaking rain. We wanted to have saturated soil when doing these measurements. We didn't have drought stress as a compounding factor. So we looked at the water infiltration. While there were no significant differences either year, you can see that the error bars on those measurements are pretty high. So this is a measurement that has a lot of variability, which can make it difficult to detect treatment differences. We definitely can see a trend for increased water infiltration with mulching, which is a good thing. This is what you want to have, is the water to be able to permeate the soil. When we look at soil compaction, we also saw decreased soil compaction with mulching, but just in 2020, the slides are pretty busy. And in 2020, we did looking at soil compaction down to a deeper depth. But you can definitely see that where the soil hill bars, or the brown bars, are higher, have greater compaction than the mulching treatments. In 2021, the measurements were not consistent with 2020. We're not sure why. We definitely are going to be repeating this measurement. So then our last question was, does mulching improve soil biology? So soil organisms play a critical role in soil processes that affect both plants and water dynamics. And some of these processes include nutrient cycling and nutrient retention, water infiltration and water holding capacity of the soil, soil structure formation, disease suppression, and degradation of pollutants. And when we're talking about soil organisms, we're not only talking about earthworms and those larger organisms that you can see with the naked eye, we're also talking about microbes such as bacteria and fungi. And in order to look at the soil biology and the soil health, we measured soil respiration, which is the amount of carbon dioxide respired from soil that's been air dried and then re-wetted. And essentially, this is measuring the amount of carbon dioxide that's formed as the organic matter is decomposed by the microbes in the soil after the soil has been re-wetted. And it essentially indicates the level of microbial activity, which is an important indicator of soil health. And so we took soil samples from our plots, dried them, then re-wetted them. And what we found is that mulching did increase soil respiration significantly in 2021, but there was a trend for increased soil respiration in 2020 as well. And so essentially we're seeing that mulching increased microbial activity, which is a benefit. Okay, so in summary, does mulching improve weed control, or does it control weeds? Does it conserve water? Does it improve soil physical properties and improve soil biology when compared to soil hilling? And what we found is that mulching did decrease weed cover, biomass, and diversity. But after 2 years, we did see that perennial weeds bordering the vine rows were beginning to creep into the mulching treatments. Mulching did increase soil moisture retention when compared to soil hilling. That can be especially important in drought-prone years and drought-prone areas. When it comes to improving soil physical properties, the results were a little bit less definitive. There were trends for increased water infiltration in both years. And there was decreased soil compaction in the first year with mulching. It was not consistent in 2021. And then with soil biology, we saw that mulching did increase soil respiration, which is indicating a higher microbial activity, which is then indicating a healthier soil. So our plan is to repeat these measurements in 2022, but based on these data, we could conclude that mulching is a sustainable alternative to soil hilling. So thank you. That is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Cathy. So we're actually in line with the scheduled time that was on the flyer, which is 4 o'clock, and we have one presentation left, which will be from Ashish Manandhar on the cost benefits of vineyard mulching. Ashish, can you share? Do you have that ability?
Yes, I can hear you. Can everyone hear me properly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Let me share my screen. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience and then staying here for a while. Today I'm Ashish. I'm a research scientist in the Department of Food, Ag, and Biological Engineering. I mainly work on techno-economic analysis and life cycle assessment of different bio-based products and as well as agricultural production systems. So today I'm going to talk about the cost benefits techno-economic analysis of vineyard mulching, and I'm going to present some of our preliminary results. I would like to thank Dr. Shah and Dr. Dami for providing with valuable suggestions while developing this techno-economic model. Yeah. So for this, for our techno-economic analysis, we are comparing 4 different scenarios of winter vine protection. One will be soil healing, and then we are comparing 3 different biomass types, namely like wheat straw, corn stover, and miscanthus. And yeah, so for our analysis, we have considered a vineyard area of 10 acre, which is consistent with some of these vineyards available in the Northeast US region. And we have considered the vine row width as 9 feet and the distance between vines within the same row as 6 feet, and the vineyard life of 25 years. And we are assuming that for our analysis, to make it a little bit simpler, we are assuming that with the vine, we have a square shape of the vine, and the mulch and the fuel storage and refill sites are located at the edge of the vineyard. And regarding the mulch mounds, like we have considered the similar dimensions of the mulch mounds that we took for our experiments. And for the mulcher, we assume that the capacity of the mulcher would be like 2 bales, and it will mulch like 1 row in each pass. And some of the major inputs to the model were like equipment cost, equipment average speed, number of the bales carried by the mulcher, some of the bale dimensions, labor rate, so which we obtained from the Department of Labor, and then fuel cost, which was like an average of the fuel cost for the last 5 years. Definitely, recently it has shot up a little bit, so it might impact a little bit in the economics as well. And also the biomass cost, nutrient value in the biomass. So the biomass cost includes the cost associated with the nutrient value in the biomass, depending on like how much nutrient is used to produce that biomass. And also some of the input parameter related to mulch application rate at year 1, as well as in year 3 and subsequent years. So we assume, based on our experiments, like we assume that the mulch application will be done in year 1. So this is like a case for wheat straw. So we are assuming that we are putting like 5.2 tons per acre of wheat straw in year 1. However, since we didn't find a lot of height reduction in year 2, we didn't apply it. And then we in year 3, like we applied 3.3 tons per acre of mulch to maintain the height of the mulch mound. And then so we have the data until like year 1 to year 3 until now. So we so based on that, like we assume that we will be putting 3.3 tons per acre of biomass in the alternative years up until the age of the vine. And then we estimated, so based on that, like all these inputs, we estimated the field performance and logistics, and determined the time to apply the mulch, and also for soil healing and de-healing. So it shows that so we have separated the time in terms of preparation and wrap up, mulch or soil application and removal. And then for in case of soil healing, we'll have just soil healing and de-healing operation, whereas for mulch application, like we'll only have 1 mulch application in once every 2 years. So due to that, like and then we have also considered the time taken to travel back and forth for the mulch refill and also the mulch bale loading. And then if the fuel is done, like we have also considered traveling for fuel refill as well as time for fuel refilling. And based on our analysis, we found that like there is like potential of around 70 to 72% of labor reduction potential. And also that will be the time when the equipment will be used. And then based on this, like we estimated the equipment related cost, which included the cost of capital recovery of the equipment, insurance, tax and housing, repair and maintenance of equipment, fuel and lubrication used, as well as labor. So as you can see here, like since the equipment is used much less in terms while we do biomass mulching, the cost of winter production cost, equipment related cost for winter protection is substantially lower for biomass based mulching compared to soil healing. However, this doesn't consider the cost of biomass. So if we add like the cost of biomass, the full cost of biomass, we can see that the cost of wine winter production is comparable using biomass straw to soil healing. However, corn and miscanthus costs are like pretty high, but this is the full cost of biomass. So but if we consider the biomass cost without its nutrient values, so we can see like further reduction in the cost. Like for example, what I mean with this is like if we, so when we procure biomass from other farmers, like they also tack in like some of the cost related with the nutrient value. But since we are using biomass for mulching, this might reduce the nutrient needs for some of those vineyards as well. So we assume that the nutrients are like balanced, whether it's used in cornfield or wheat field or marginal land or other agricultural land and vines. So if in that case, like there's a slight advantage using biomass mulches compared to soil healing. However, the cost of biomass miscanthus is still higher compared to soil healing. And we also noticed that the weed cover for biomass-based mulching is pretty low, and there's a potential for mulches to reduce the cost for weed control. So so as you can see, like some of these different mulches, they reduce the weed cover by 24 to 62% compared to soil healing practices. And the cost of weed control per acre for soil healing was found to be around like $118 per acre. So if we assume that only 50% of the expected herbicide reduction can be achieved, so there could be further additional savings in herbicide cost for the biomass mulching scenarios, which further reduces the cost down to like less than $80 per acre for biomass straw, and even lower for and some around like $100 for corn stover, and comparable to soil healing for miscanthus. So we also did sensitivity analysis to see like what can impact the cost of winter brine protection using biomass mulches, and I'm presenting this example for wheat straw. So it seems like as we so what I did was like we changed the cost of different parameters by plus and minus 25%, and to see like what its impact will be on the vineyard protection cost. So as you can see, like the cost of biomass was one of the most sensitive parameters which impacted the vineyard protection cost, and followed by biomass quantity that was used in year 1, and also the percentage of mulch that was used in the subsequent years, and mulcher cost, labor cost, and vineyard size also had roles in the winter vine protection cost. And then so based on this, what we can conclude is biomass mulching can reduce the requirements for equipment and labor and their costs substantially. So this is particularly important when we have these labor shortages due to this pandemic or any other kind of situations where we are unable to source the labor. And then the overall mulch application cost depends substantially on the biomass cost, application rates in year 1 and the subsequent years. And optimizing biomass application rates can further reduce the mulching cost. So the cost of miscanthus was higher because we were using more quantity of miscanthus compared to wheat straw and corn stover. So if we can optimize some of those biomass application rates, it can further reduce the mulching costs. And then also, if we can locally source the biomass from nearby fields, or if the farmer already has a source of biomass residues that they can use, it can further reduce the mulching costs. With this, I'd like to thank you for your attention and open for any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So that concludes the talk portion of the programming, and we can move on ahead to the Q&A session for all of our speakers. We do have at least 9 questions or comments in the chat box. Okay, let me scroll on up and see what we've got. Okay, so the first question is, when using straw, has anyone experienced mice eating the bark of the vines? One grower here in New York had a problem years ago and quit using straw because of the mice. Med, you might be best to answer that.
We really didn't see any impact from rodents at all, actually, in all of our 3 locations. So I know that it's something always asked, of course, it may depend on the location. I believe also it may be impacted by the winter, if it is very cold or a mild winter. But in all of our 3 locations, with these 2 varieties, I think we have more varieties included. We didn't see this as a problem.
Okay. So I had a question, which was, what was the width on the larger red mulcher, and will it fit a 10 to 12 foot row width? Because it looked pretty wide, but it could have been the perspective of the video. And it looks like that was answered in the chat box with 6.9 feet with tires. So that should fit a relatively even narrow row. So it's really surprising.
Actually, I'd like a quick comment. We also drove it in a 10-foot spacing, and it fits nicely with no problem.
Okay. So then it is practical for a vineyard row width. So that's good to know.
Yep.
The next question was, do high winds impact the mulch? Example, straw staying in place and protecting the graft, which reminds me kind of like soil hilling can wash off over the winter.
Actually, I already answered that question, and the answer is no. It's amazing now. We always think, that when you apply it, it's going to be an issue, and we haven't seen it with any of them. Actually. As long as when you apply it, it's not windy. But then once it is applied, the wind really has no impact. It settles in any of the mulches that we use. And actually, even the one that is used by commercial growers, we ask them, they say the same thing.
Okay. So the next question is how does mulch impact pre and post emergent herbicide application? More particular, how do you apply herbicide once mulch is in place? Kathy?
Well, I think the idea with the mulching is that you use the mulching in place of the herbicide treatments.
Yes, but you said perennial weeds do eventually grow in, so I imagine at some point there's going to either be, would reapplication of the mulch be sufficient to suppress those weeds, or would you have to use something like Roundup to kill back the perennial weeds before the next application of mulch?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be, especially if the perennial weeds are creeping in from the, let's say if you have grass bordering a lawn edge bordering your vineyard. I mean, that's going to be something that, you know, we'll need to figure out that system for, but you probably would need to do a post-emergent application of something to kill those. Yeah.
Okay, so say if weed suppression is good for 2 years, then you would do an application before you add on new mulch
Yeah.
every other year?
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to look and see was, you know, there's some of those perennial weeds, like white clover is a very, very robust weed, and, you know, that's hard to smother, but we should be doing some research to look and see if we do that reapplication every 2 years, will that layer of mulch then smother those weeds out? So that's something that I think that I don't know if people have looked at that yet.
Okay. So the next question is there any information or thoughts on the use of properly aged herbwood mulch?
That's another question that I answered too.
Oh, right.
So basically, when you use wood chips, you know, like as a mold, because as I mentioned in my presentation, this carbon to nitrogen ratio is extremely high with those. So there's like the risk of less nitrogen being available, and that is typically not recommended, you know, in vineyards.
Okay. Any thoughts on how a winter like 2013 would impact the effectiveness versus covering with soil? So I'm presuming, I'm not sure where Steve Crash is from, but I imagine you're asking about a very, very cold winter.
So I assume this is 2014, the polar vortex year, not 2013.
Sure. Regardless, so I'm guessing what the efficacy of mulch would be in a very, very, very cold winter. So something below -10, -15.
I'm not sure if AJ is there, but based on the data from the temperature, we see like and you may correct me, like an increase of temperature with the mold of over 20 degrees, okay, compared to the air temperature. We didn't experience any extreme cold temperature during this studies for the last 3 years. But I mean, theoretically, if the mold, you know, behave the same way as what we've been saying, you know, it should provide protection. One of the things we don't know, and I don't have the answer right now, is when you have this extreme cold temperature, and they last for extended period of time, whether the mold lose its effectiveness. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. So I guess to follow on from that, was soil hilling sufficient enough to preserve the graft union in most vinifera from 2014?
Yeah, I mean, just the same thing as I just said. Yeah.
Okay. So then the last question that's currently in the chat box is, does the straw need to be mulched, or could a similar result be achieved by directly applying it in a small vineyard?
So the straw that we use is just regular straw.
Can you repeat that?
The straw that we use is regular straw. What is the question exactly? Like, did we?
Does it have to
Okay.
go through a mulcher, or can you just like take a square bale of straw and just apply it by hand?
Yeah, if you have a very small vineyard, you know, like I showed in my presentation, that is applied by hand, really. So it basically breaks down in like a bale, and we put it, you know, like around the vines and then some in between. So what we did really was not done by a machine, I mean a motor. So I think if you have an acre, you know, you have time, you know, to do it, you could do it by hand.
Okay,
Yeah, just to add to it, maybe the particle size may have impact as well. So that is also the decision needs to be made, or factor to be considered for decision making.
okay. So I have one final question, and that is, after 3 years of working on this mulching project, would you have come to the conclusion that you would suggest adopting mulching as a winter protection or a beneficial soil conservation vineyard practice? Is this something that you would want to encourage people to try and adopt, basically?
I mean, I could speak, and of course, I'd like to hear from my colleagues as well. Is yeah, based on really, we would like to kind of fine tune this cost analysis part of this project. But if you consider mulch to be used not only for winter protection, but you have all these additional benefits, really, which are many, especially if you are trying to be more sustainable vineyard. As Cathy mentioned, you improve the biodiversity, you know, of the soil, which is a good thing. To me, these are all benefits that you don't get from soil. And then one of the things that is also important is you eliminate this problem with the erosion. We saw a better filtration of water, so really we have less water settling, you know, when we use the mulch. It was very obvious, you know, when we looked in the vineyard. So there's so many benefits, in my opinion. Once we fine tune this cost analysis, it is definitely a better option than soil.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat box. Not sure if everybody's had their questions answered, or if anybody has any last parting thoughts from the group of speakers, or anything else they'd like to share.
Very quickly here, just more like an announcement, kind of heads up. We're probably gonna try to plan for like a field day where we show these trials of mulches, and hopefully this is not finalized yet. So you may even have a demonstration of different equipment, you know, using the mulching. So you know, just as Mary mentioned earlier, a lot of kind of hesitancy from growers. Really, there's not a lot of information to go whether to use it or not, you know, and hopefully with this information today, and hopefully during the field day, the growers will feel more confident that this is something to consider in the future.
Okay, so another question did come in. How thick of an application of the straw is recommended? I believe you held, what, 8 inches around the graft union in height, and about a 24-inch 2-foot ring around the vine?
Yeah, yeah. That's what we use. I mean, my prediction, I mean, we went high enough just to be sure, you know. I think, again, when we do this cost analysis, that is something, at least maybe with straw, maybe with Kansas, we could go even lower, you know, because when we look at the when we look at the temperature under the mound, you could probably even go like 6 inches only. So that may reduce the amount of mulch applied. But what we did, and this also confirms what has been done a while ago in Michigan when they used 8 inches. They even used less than that, and it still worked. The one thing that right now it cannot be done with an equipment is the height. You know, it is more uniform. So if you apply 8 inches, you know, it will be uniform throughout the row, which is different than when we did it manually. We tried to use more around the vine, like 8 inches, and then less between the vines, which is 3 inches, because we did it by hand. But we don't see an equipment right now able to do that.
So then the real trade-off would be between the biomass versus the labor it requires to apply manually.
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically like the cost, yeah. And then, I mean, obviously, when you use the 3 inches, based on what Cathy shared, you are still able to control the weeds. Again, there are differences among the mulches, but even with 3 inches, you know, you're still able to control the weeds.
Okay, so a couple more questions just came into the chat box. One is, could laying what I call flakes of straw from a small bale around the vine work? And I'm not really sure what flakes of straw means.
It's the
Oh, gotcha. So basically, if you just take a cross section of a bale of hay and lay it down, would that work fine, or would you have to fluff it up, I guess?
I believe the one we tied around the vine, they're about that, yeah. We
Okay.
want to make sure like they're very close, you know, there's no air pockets to lose their efficiency, you know, or effectiveness.
Yeah,
So you want to make sure of that. AJ, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think flake may not work because there will be way too much of room for the cold air to enter. So I think it has to be fluffed, or better, I think smaller the size, it will provide like better protection, better coverage. But again, like there is a trade-off with the cost, because chopping them is not simple and cheap. So kind of there will be trade-off, but flake, just putting the flake may not work. It has to be somehow like fluffed and then certain particle size.
Okay, the last question in the box is the mulch removed from the graft during the growing season? Which to me would ask the question, was the scion rooting low enough and unimportant enough to require removing the mulch?
So during this study, we didn't remove it, and that's why we looked at the scion rooting. But even when we have the rooting, like I mentioned, the size of the mulch is critical. The bigger the size, you know, of the particle of the mulch, the less rooting we have. So, and even when we saw some rooting, really, they were small and they didn't survive. So I don't think that is really an issue in terms of rooting of the scion.
Would that apply to all of the mulch types, including the miscanthus, the vine miscanthus?
Yeah. Actually, the one that I showed again with the miscanthus, when it is a very small size, like a sawdust, definitely the rooting is very significant. So that is basically not desirable. Okay. But when we use the larger size miscanthus, so again, you could use the same type of species. You just have to control the size. When we use the 1 inch, we didn't have that issue with miscanthus.
Okay, so that's an important caveat, particle size.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
This is Cathy, just going back to the question about the flakes of straw or the layers of straw from the rectangular bales. We did some experimenting, unofficial experimenting and playing around with how the best way to lay down the straw. And I think you could use it in those flaked layers, but then you would need to maybe get some fluffed straw to put in the gaps that are going to be formed right around the vine itself. You can only get up so close, and then you're going to have a couple spaces.
Yeah, it's true. It wouldn't matter if it was flaked or not in between the vines because you're not really protecting anything. You're just covering the ground.
Yes. Yeah. So around the vine, it is very important to minimize, air pockets and exposure of the graft union, because when that is the case, when it gets cold, it's gonna get cold inside of the mound, so it's very important to keep it, kind of denser, to provide that protection.
So awesome. I think that concludes our program today. If you have any questions for us, please just email me or Dr. Dami and we can get them answered, especially if you're looking to adopt this maybe this coming fall. Again, to reiterate, we are looking towards using the mulching for a demonstration at the Kingsville Field Day coming up later this year. So please be on the lookout for that announcement. And thank you so much for coming, and thank you to all of our presenters for a job well done. I'm going to stop the recording now, but this will be available in a link after this afternoon.